The city of Jericho stood silent and unshaken behind its towering walls. From a distance, it looked impenetrable, an immovable obstacle between the Israelites and the land God had promised them. Thick, fortified, and heavily guarded, Jericho wasn't just a city, it was a symbol of resistance, a giant in the land of promise. After 40 years of wandering, a new generation had crossed the Jordan. Their feet touched the soil of Canaan, but the promise wasn't yet fulfilled, because between God's promise and their possession stood Jericho. And Joshua, their leader, was faced with the impossible. He wasn't a man without experience, he had fought battles before. But this was different. There were no cracks in the wall to exploit, no gates left unguarded, no clever strategy that would make the bricks crumble. So Joshua waited, and in that waiting, God spoke. See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. Notice the language, I have delivered. Past tense. From heaven's perspective, the victory was already done. But then came the instructions. Bizarre, counterintuitive, almost illogical. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up. Everyone straight in. No swords, no ladders, no siege, just walking, trumpets, and a shout. Imagine being an Israelite warrior that day. You've trained for combat, you've waited for years, and now your first major battle is walking silently in circles. But that's what they did. For 6 days they rose early. They marched once around the city. Trumpets sounded, but the people said nothing. Not a word, no taunts, no noise. Just the rhythmic sound of footsteps and the haunting echo of ram's horns bouncing off stone walls. Inside Jericho, the people watched, confused, anxious, maybe even mocking. But outside the walls, obedience was being forged, because faith sometimes looks foolish before it looks victorious. Before we continue, if this story is speaking to something in your heart, if you're walking in circles around something that looks immovable, take a moment to like this podcast, share it with someone who needs encouragement, leave a comment about your journey of faith, and subscribe for more biblical insight that strengthens your spirit. Your engagement helps this message reach others in need of breakthrough. Let's go back to the story. On the 7th day, everything changed. They woke up early again. This time they marched not once, but 7 times. 7 full laps. Still no words, still no sword drawn, still no cracks in the wall. But then came the moment. The trumpet sounded, and Joshua gave the command, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." Nay. And they did. Thousands of voices rising together in a shout of faith, not because the wall had fallen, but because God said it would. And in that moment, something happened. Stone trembled, earth shifted, and the wall that had stood for generations crumbled in an instant, not by force, but by faith. They didn't fight their way in, they shouted their way through. Because when God speaks, walls fall. That shout wasn't noise, it was faith vocalized. It was a declaration of trust, a cry of surrender and authority all at once. It was obedience released in sound. The miracle didn't come from volume, it came from alignment. The people aligned their steps, their silence, their shout with the instruction of God, and that alignment invited the miraculous. Jericho teaches us that some battles are not won by strength, but by submission. That sometimes God asks us to walk in circles, not to waste our time, but to stretch our trust. Every step around those walls was a step of obedience. Every day of silence was a discipline of faith, and every trumpet blast reminded them this victory belongs to God. Faith isn't always flashy. Sometimes it's repetitive, quiet, obedient, but in the end, it brings down walls that nothing else can. But what happens after the wall falls? For Israel, it wasn't just about victory, it was about obedience through the entire process. They entered the city as instructed, destroying what God commanded and sparing Rahab, the woman whose faith had opened the door to redemption. Even in a city destined for destruction, mercy was waiting for the one who trusted. That's the nuance of Jericho. Judgment and mercy, command and compassion, destruction and deliverance, all in one moment. And still, the core lesson remains. It wasn't the shout alone that brought the walls down. It was the obedience before the shout, the faith that showed up 6 days in a row without seeing results, the persistence to circle something that looked unmovable, not because they saw cracks forming, but because God had spoken. We don't like to walk without progress. We don't like to wait without signs. But faith often looks like motion without immediate reward. Have you ever been there? Circling something with prayer, with effort, with surrender, and wondering if anything is changing. Maybe your Jericho is a strained relationship, a long-awaited promise, a prayer that hasn't been answered, a healing that hasn't come, a calling that feels stuck behind high walls. But here's what Jericho shows us. The wall didn't need to fall a little at a time. It didn't need to weaken visibly. All it needed was one divine moment of release. God's timing is not delayed. It's perfect. And when the seventh day arrives, when the final lap is done, when the trumpet sounds and the shout rises, what felt impenetrable can crumble in an instant. Until then, the call is simple. Keep walking. Stay silent when he says, stay silent. Shout when he says, shout. Trust that every lap matters, even the ones that feel pointless. God could have given Jericho on day one, but he didn't, because he was doing something in them before he did something for them. He was forming a people who would obey not just when it made sense, but when it didn't. Because obedience in the absence of understanding is the essence of faith. And faith that's tested is faith that's proven. So if you're walking in circles today, if you're tired of quiet obedience, if you're aching to see the wall fall, take heart. He sees every step. He hears every silent prayer. He knows exactly how many laps are left. And when it's time, you'll know. Because the trumpet will sound, the shout will rise, and the wall will fall. Not by your strength, but by his word, by his promise, by his power. And when it does, you'll walk straight in. Not because you conquered, but because you trusted. Not because you broke it down, but because you walked around. Not because you fought for it, but because you followed. That is the way of Jericho. A wall that fell at a shout, but only after days of unseen obedience. This is more than a military story. It's a spiritual pattern. Walls don't fall because we yell louder. They fall when we walk in alignment with God's instruction. And sometimes the loudest sound of faith is our silence. Other times it's a shout. But always it's obedience that shakes the ground. So keep walking, keep listening. And when God says shout, don't hesitate. Let it rise from a place of faith, not frustration. Let it echo with trust, not desperation. Because on the other side of that shout is the fulfillment of what he promised. And no wall can stand in the way of a word from God. Thank you for listening. And maybe, just maybe, God lets us walk those silent laps so that when the wall finally falls, we know it wasn't by our doing. It wasn't our strategy. It wasn't our power. It was his. Because Jericho doesn't just teach us about God's power, it teaches us about his process. The walking wasn't a delay, it was preparation. The silence wasn't punishment, it was discipline. The shout wasn't a ritual, it was release. It was the culmination of every quiet step, every unspoken prayer, every hidden act of faith. So what wall are you walking around? What promise are you trusting God to fulfill? What victory are you waiting for? Don't stop walking. Don't give up after lap 5. Don't quit because nothing seems to be changing. Faith isn't about seeing progress, it's about trusting the promise. And the same God who brought down Jericho's walls is still working, still moving, still honouring the faith of those who walk in obedience. So whether you're on lap 1 or lap 7, whether your shout is ready or your legs are weary, and take this story with you. When the walls fell at a shout, it wasn't sudden to heaven, it was the fulfillment of divine timing. And if you're walking with God, your moment will come. Just keep circling and be ready to shout when he says it's time. And when that day comes, you won't just witness the wall fall, you'll walk through the rubble with a deeper faith, a quieter confidence, and a testimony that shouts louder than any trumpet. Because victory isn't just about what falls, it's about who you become while waiting for it. So shout, not in fear, but in faith. And know this, your obedience is never wasted. God always finishes what he starts. Always.